I worked in the wellness industry for over a decade, and I have a degree in psychology, and I worked in early childhood education. I had access to pretty much everything you could. Like, all my friends work at the forefront of health. I'm in like the innovation city of the world. I'm surrounded by doctors. I'm working at a genetics lab in women's health, and still I didn't get a diagnosis or like even think about ADHD for myself.
Hello and welcome to Divergent Paths. I'm your host, Dr. Regina McMenemy. I am a doctor, but not that kind of doctor, and this is a podcast, not medical advice. Have you always felt a little different but didn't know why? Have you struggled with tasks that some people seem to handle with ease? Are you mystified by social norms and interactions? Divergent Paths is a podcast for late diagnosed neurodivergent people that explores the joys and frustrations of having a spicy brain. In each episode, we'll dive into the unique experiences of discovering ADHD, autism, or both later in life. What defines a later life diagnosis? Anytime the realization happens outside of the so-called norm of childhood and adolescence. Kendra Koch is founder and CEO at Divergently, a social safety net bridging the support gap for late diagnosed neurodivergent women. Kendra and I have an amazing conversation where she shares with us her experience with her own late diagnosis and how social health is deeply tied to physical health. So stay tuned, and thanks for listening to Divergent Paths. Do you have like a special interest or something that's kind of persisted for you through your life that you've like to talk about?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately just because it's
Mhm.
coming up in my community and people are talking about their special interests, and I'm just learning about that term.
Mhm.
And I actually had a hard time figuring out what it was. And then I realized that there's kind of like a thread that's gone through my whole life that's been consistent, but
Mhm.
the manifestation of it has always changed. And so I will have like a pretty intense special interest for maybe like a 1 year to 3 year bucket of time,
Mm.
and then I'm kind
Mhm.
of over it and move on to the next thing. So I've had a lot of different
A
ones,
lot of different
and
ones, yeah.
yeah, so I'll just like pick one and go deep. But I think the common thread is like human experience,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
just different variations of what that can look like.
Yeah.
And I'd say when I was in high school, I was super into sports, so I did every sport I could sign up for.
Mhm.
Um, and then when I was in college, I honestly can't say. I think I was just too busy working and going to school to even have
Right.
space for a special
Right.
interest.
Sure.
Um, and then I moved to San Francisco and I started working in.
That's my hometown.
Oh, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
beautiful city.
It is, yeah.
I lived there 12 years, so a good
Oh,
long
wow.
time.
Yeah.
And, I started working in early childhood education, and I noticed that the kids there were not eating great, and, partially because of what the school was feeding them, partially what the parents were feeding. And I think at that time, like, health was a special interest to me, but I was really
Okay.
into what factors of like our lifestyle can help facilitate health, and how do we make our environments healthier. And that's probably a theme that's gone through literally everything I've done, from the sports I mentioned in high school to now I'm building a community space
Right.
in mental health and like a social health platform. And the the food led me into working for different startups in the health system, and then I was really into startups for a while, but not like, I'm not like a tech person. Like, everyone's
Right.
like, oh, you're like a tech person, but I'm actually not. It's just the environment like the environment I was in. And because I lived in San Francisco for 12 years, every company I worked at was a startup.
Right, right, yeah.
um but yeah, I did nutrition education, I did food tech and agriculture tech, I did family tech, I worked in allergy prevention, death care, genetics, like lots of
Ah,
different kind of manifestations of health. And then
cool.
And then I was like, this is too cerebral. I got a little bit burnt out from it. So I went to acting school. And then I
Oh,
had
wow.
like this,
This is
yeah,
so
good.
ADHD.
I know. Yeah. So by
I love
day, I
it.
was working at a genetics lab, and by night, I was going to acting school. And yeah, it makes sense now. This is all before I had a diagnosis too. So
Right, sure.
I had
Oh,
no.
yeah. That's actually kind of what I was gonna lead into, like, I have found, um, that because one of my special interests is just kind of people in general, like, and humanities, and, I have a PhD and, social science essentially. Um, you know, I was able to mask a lot more effectively because of how closely I was studying people. And so I wonder with people who are late diagnosed if one of the reasons why people or lifestyles or even health and some of the stuff you're talking about puts off the diagnosis to a degree because you're so savvy
Mm,
about the people, right? So I was kind of wondering if that might have been part of what kind of played into diagnosis as well.
yeah, maybe. I mean, I had a sort of atypical childhood in general, and so
Mhm.
I'm not even sure diagnosis would have come up for me. And I liked school and I did well
Mhm.
at
Oh, yeah.
school. I was
Mhm.
one of those kids that
Yep.
was in gifted programs, so that's probably the clue there. But I yeah, like I wasn't struggling really at school, but I do remember kids saying, "Oh, you're like the smartest, ditziest person I know." Like stuff like
Wow.
that. Yeah.
Oh,
So it was like
yeah.
I was aware that in some places I was considered very smart, but in other
Mhm.
parts of my life, people were like, "What's wrong with you?"
Mhm.
And like, "How could you miss that?" Or, how could you like one time I left all the clothes I owned at camp, like
Oh.
in a dirty clothes bag. And,
Oh.
you know, my family friend who drove me home went 3 hours of driving before I realized I left all my clothes at camp. So,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Mhm.
But I think it was just like, "Oh, you're not paying attention," or you're like,
Right.
I was, like,
Yeah.
very daydreamy,
Mhm. So,
and
like, on the inattentive kind of, yeah.
yeah,
Mm,
exactly,
yeah.
and also I was, like, quiet and
Mhm.
well behaved, like,
Mhm.
the manifestation
Same.
of my ADHD was very like, I didn't bother people with it really.
Right, right,
Yeah,
and that's, as we're learning now, that's one of the reasons why assigned female birth bodies tend to be diagnosed later because they didn't understand that not everybody manifests by bouncing off the walls in the
mhm,
room and instead are bouncing off the walls of their brain,
mhm,
you know? Yeah, I am seeing that that's very similar to what my story was like too. Yeah.
yeah. And I don't know, I guess have always studied people and I loved reading, so that was a
Mhm,
big thing that I did a lot, and I would
mhm.
read all these stories about, like, just kids who had lives very different from my life, and I loved that,
Right.
and I loved novels, and I read way above my,
Uh-huh.
maturity level, which was probably not great, but I was super interested in other people's lives.
Right.
But I don't think I had an awareness of it really.
Oh, no.
I would just, like,
Mm-mm.
do it. I would just read and
Mhm.
read and read and read forever, and my parents were like, "She's reading, she's fine," so
Right, yeah, yep,
there
same.
wasn't
Yeah,
yeah.
same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now you have a
See
podcast interviewing people, so it all makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
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 all these things tend to line up with each other.
yeah.
So are there other aspects of your childhood you said your childhood was, like, atypical? Are the other
Mhm.
aspects of other than I don't think this is an atypical presentation of a female-bodied ADHD at all. I think it's a very typical experience, but are there other aspects of your childhood that sort of impacted your knowledge and your awareness?
Of ADHD in
Yeah.
general?
Or
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I don't think so. I got diagnosed completely out of the blue. I was not seeking a diagnosis at
Oh,
all.
really? Oh,
Yeah,
tell me about that. I wanna know
yeah.
about that. Yeah.
I, had been going to therapy for probably 8 years or something, and I was on my second therapist. I
Mhm.
had started seeing her primarily for just like crippling anxiety, or
Mhm.
that's what I thought it was. And
Yeah.
I had one specific job that I was just having panic attacks like before I would go
Oh.
into work.
Oh.
Yeah, and I really thought that maybe I was just stressed or overwhelmed with work, or I was not,
Mhm.
maybe I was just
Or
pushing too hard, I don't know, or
you were in
anxiety.
burnout.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was, yeah, but I
Mhm.
didn't realize that's what it
Oh, of
was.
course. I mean, it's almost impossible to recognize when you're in it. When you're after, you're like, "Oh my gosh, now I see." Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then now looking back too, it makes sense why it was that specific job, because I had always worked in early stage startups that were very fluid. I was constantly
Mhm.
doing new things. I was working in
Mhm.
product, I was working in marketing, I was working with the executive team, I was meeting clients, I was like bringing in
Mhm.
agencies. So my job was very dynamic and interesting. And also the teams were small and I mostly worked remotely and I had a lot of flexibility. And so those accommodations
Right.
now that I know that need to be made
Now
at
you know
work.
there were accommodations,
Yeah, they
right?
were, I didn't know that, but like I
Uh-huh.
had been getting those met. And then when I
Mhm.
switched to this specific job, I had to take a train for an hour a day down to the South Bay. To get to the office, I was required to work in the office. Getting up from my
Mhm.
desk was seen as a big negative, so movement was, like, not okay at that job.
Yep.
It was an open floor plan, super noisy, and all of my colleagues were on calls the whole time, so I heard
Yep.
there were, like, 10
Their noise all the
conversations
time.
behind me, and before
Mhm.
that, I never really had that experience at work, and so I think it was just, like, not a good, um, environment for me, and
Yeah.
also the there were just, like, little things, like, the microwave was close by so I could smell people's food, and I was just in
Oh, yeah.
sensory overload.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
God, yeah. Mm.
yeah.
So I'm sorry, you just brought me back to, like, a time I worked as an adjunct instructor for so many years, and when you're an adjunct, you're sharing an office with 20
Mm.
other people, maybe more, depending on your department, and there was so often that I would be in, this corral of, like, little tiny desks shoved in a room in a corner where nobody could
Mhm.
see you because nobody wants to see that there's 20 adjuncts carrying the university. That's another podcast. But, somebody came in one time with, some kind of fish that they had heated up
Oh.
in the microwave, and I nearly died. I was like, "I cannot function in this room," and I didn't have the have to stay at my desk. I just got up and left because I had lots of autonomy in that job.
Mhm.
But I know exactly what you mean about that, you know, all of those are triggers, like, all one of the 5 things you just listed are triggers,
Mhm.
like, and to have all of them at once. Oof,
Yeah.
yeah,
Now looking back, it's so obvious, but when I was
right,
in it, I had no
of course.
idea, so I go to therapy
Mhm,
for anxiety, and I saw her for quite a while, and during that time, I had switched jobs,
good, yeah,
and it was better, and that's around the time I think I started acting too, so I had this kind of physical outlet, which was really good for me, like, acting is
mhm,
very somatic in a way,
yep,
and that's
yeah,
actually where I learned about somatics was in acting, um, but I was in San Francisco, so I was walking a lot too, like,
mhm,
I didn't have a
right,
car, I walked everywhere, so I was getting exercise,
that's
I was,
good,
like,
yeah,
meditating every morning, I was eating really healthy, I was doing all the right things, getting good sleep. So I was doing pretty well, actually, and then I got pregnant, and my
mm,
therapist was like, "Oh, by the way, you have ADHD," and I don't know for sure because we didn't discuss it, but I feel like she knew the whole time. But
right,
she told me when I got pregnant because she was aware that that would change my ability, like, all these things I had put in place, exercise and meditation, the sleep, the routines. When
all
you
of
have
it
a
comes
baby, like,
crashing
say
down.
goodbye to all of that.
Yep. Yeah, and when
So,
you're yeah, I wasn't diagnosed before I had my daughter, and, yeah, I would very much point to that as the time when everything fell apart, like, because
mm,
I couldn't. Like, exactly like she said, or, she intended for you, all of the accommodations I had built into my life, not recognizing they were accommodations, went away.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I'm
yeah.
glad you got some warning.
I know, but
Well,
I
the
did.
timing of that is a little hard because, like, you're already going through, like, being pregnant, that like is like this long transition into motherhood, right? Like
Mhm.
it starts as you go through the whole process of growing a person in you, and like to have to transition into understanding that your brain is working different and you have been accommodating yourself your whole life, and this is why you feel so stressed and why you're so burned out, I imagine was a lot.
It wasn't at the time. It
Okay.
was the pandemic also,
Oh, wow.
and
Okay.
so but
Wow.
actually yeah, I know.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Like the
I know.
stacking is just like,
I
ow,
know.
ow, ow, ow.
Yeah. But weirdly, like, in the pandemic, maybe it's not so weird, I was okay. Like, it
Well,
was
yeah, I mean, the external things are taken away from you, so
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think in a way, I got lucky being pregnant at that time compared to people that I know who had like
Right.
teenagers or
Right,
school
yeah,
age kids. If you're gonna have a
yeah.
kid, like that, she was protected in my body. I had like a lot of space and quiet. I could rest.
Mhm.
Like it wasn't horrifically bad. I think it was
That's good.
isolating in a lot of ways.
Right.
I was really lucky to have um, care from a group of midwives at a birth center. So they were able to like close the birth center and see one patient at a time. So like I was able to get better health care than if I had been primarily being seen at a hospital. So
Mhm.
considering all the things that were really terrible and hard about the pandemic, I feel like I got very lucky.
Awesome.
Um, And I didn't really take my therapist's warning that seriously. Like she said, "Oh, you have ADHD, you should learn about neurodivergence." She gave me a book called Divergent Minds, I think it
Oh,
is.
yeah.
Yeah.
That was my book that found that yeah, that's mine that put me on this path too.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um I read it and I think I just read it and was like, "Hmm, interesting." And
You're
also
like, "Oh."
didn't really
Yeah.
put too much on it. And then I had my baby. We moved to Atlanta. We moved
From San
from
Francisco?
San Francisco.
Oof,
Yeah,
okay.
it was a big culture
Wow.
shift,
Yeah.
and, we moved into a house that had mold, so I didn't like, that
Oh, boy.
made me really sick, and
Mhm.
then having the baby and then being in the pandemic with a newborn and not being able to, like, get out of the house and being in a house that
Right.
was making me sick, I think all of that, plus, like, the hormonal changes and then the sleep disruption and stuff, that's when I was like, "Okay, this is something I really have to take seriously." Like,
Mhm.
I got treatment for the mold and we got out of the house and all of that's better now,
Right.
but, it did amplify the ADHD symptoms that I had and really made me, like, understand my body a lot better because everything was just it was like, I'm doing fine to like, the
Right.
complete
To
opposite end of
everything's
the
falling apart.
spectrum where I couldn't
Yeah.
even function, like, I couldn't remember what I did 2 hours before. I was, like, super disoriented, I was completely ungrounded, and just, like, felt like I was floating through my life and, like, in
Mm.
a dream,
Mhm.
and that part was really, really challenging, and I think
Yeah.
it's taken about 2.5 years or so, I don't know, timelines are kind of fuzzy for me, but, like,
Sure.
2.5 years to make sense of my diagnosis, make sense of my body's needs, understand, like, what pieces of this is sensory, like,
Mhm.
related to sensory overload, and I did always know I was highly sensitive, but, it's, like, something you hear a lot once you learn about
Yeah.
neurodivergence is like, oh, highly sensitive just probably means you have ADHD or autism, but,
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
um
that's what I had learned about highly sensitive children. I had
mm,
learned because my daughter was showing signs of, neurodivergence when she was very little, and I didn't understand what was going on because, of course, I didn't have a diagnosis. And so I had found a group on Facebook that had led me to like highly sensitive children. And I was like, okay, so this is what I'm dealing with, a highly sensitive child. And now I'm like, okay, now I know we're probably dealing with a form of ADHD that is very similar to me. But I think her dad, although he's undiagnosed, pretty sure is autism as well. But,
mm.
he's very resistant to any kind of labels. because he
Right.
thinks labels are bad. I think labels are empowering. It's a very differing point of view.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
wonder too if there's like a gender component to that because I mean, for
Yeah.
many reasons, but I
Yeah.
feel like in a way women almost need the label to be taken seriously, whereas
Yes.
like men can more easily just be like, I need this accommodation. And people are like, okay.
Right.
Or we're
Yeah,
like,
exactly. You
yeah.
know, I think you're right. That's actually a really good observation just about the general sexism around neurodivergence. I think men getting accommodations might be easier, like you said, just because it's like, oh, well, if I need a standing desk. I cannot imagine somebody in a work situation, an assigned male at birth body saying, I need a standing desk, and somebody saying, no, you don't. No, they'd be like, okay, well, we'll get you one, and
Hmm.
not recognizing that standing desk wouldn't help me. That doesn't help me focus. I know I bought one and then I got a treadmill because I'm like, okay, the treadmill underneath will help. None of it helped. I have to go outside to walk.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, those kinds of asks I think would be easier. I hadn't thought about the difference in there. Yeah.
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 I wonder too, also because a lot of times, like you were saying, you learned about it through your daughter.
Mhm. Mhm.
And with women, we're often more connected to our kids in that way. And
Mhm.
so, like, I don't know. I wonder if there's something there. I think for me, like my daughter's 4, so I don't know, like she probably is neurodivergent
Mhm.
just based off of like
You
the
want yeah.
behavior we notice, but
Yeah.
I almost feel like I can't properly help her or get her the support she needs if I am not able to do that for myself. And so I feel so connected to her as
Mhm.
her mother that I feel like if
Yep.
I need to give her a label, I have to do that to myself as well.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
tool, right? Like the labels
Yes.
are a tool. So if you don't need it, then okay, I can see why people don't want it. And there are risks to having it too.
There are risks to having it. Yeah, it's not a cut and dry situation, but
Mhm,
that is also very similar to, I got my diagnosis last year and I was 49, and a lot of people were like, "Why are you getting this diagnosis at your age? Like, this doesn't you don't need this." And I was like, "Well, I would disagree to that entirely."
mhm,
But also in in me understanding myself and understanding how I function, I will be able to be a better parent. Um, Having a family history that accurately, you know, documents your divergence will make it easier for the next generations to get the kind of support that they need. So there's like so many steps and so many reasons why it is important to do this, especially as my daughter is 10, she's going to be 11 early next year. So like she's heading into the time I know that all of the hormone changes she's going to go through in the next few years are going to compound her divergence as well, her neurodivergence as well. Her spicy brain is going to go nuts because she's going to have all the spicy hormones heading in there. And that's going to make this whole little like curry of you
I like that.
brain activity that is going to it's going to be a thing. It's going to be, something that we're going to have to, be more careful about. And I feel empowered by it. I know that that's not true for everybody. People feel labels are limiting in some aspects, but I think it helps more than it hurts, at least my
Yeah,
experience. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, there's the stigma, and I think that's what
Hmm.
people are afraid of, and I get that, but, um, we can't really move past it unless we start defining things, so it is really
Right.
challenging. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
That's I think that one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you was because of the recognition that you had, and the community you're building. So tell us a little bit about Divergently and like where in your story that comes from, because I have a feeling it's kind of like tied into kind of right where we're at in
Mhm.
your evolution here.
Yeah, for sure. All that stuff that I went through with the mold
Hmm.
having a baby and learning about my symptoms and feeling really confident, like, oh, I was managing ADHD fine before I had my daughter, and
Right.
I like was naive thinking I would be able to continue doing that. but I couldn't. And when I was kind of forced to like take a break and heal,
Mhm.
I also probably was in burnout. I was like co-founder of a different startup and just it was just all way too much. Um, I literally stripped my life down to a blank slate as much as a person can. Because we had the mold, we moved and
Mhm.
we threw away everything we owned because if we didn't want to like bring mold spores with
Right.
us.
Absolutely.
I
Yep.
left my startup. I took about 4 months off just to get better. And
Mhm.
when I was at the previous startup, I was trying to get out of the wellness industry because I was feeling a little bit burnt out, like
Fair.
frustrated that I worked in the wellness industry for over a decade and I have a degree in psychology and I worked in early childhood education. And still, I didn't get a diagnosis or like even think about
Right.
ADHD for myself. And
Right. Yeah.
that I was thinking about that a lot as I was healing. Like, how come the one thing that's actually helped me
Came
was
so
just
late.
like, yeah, it
Yeah.
came so late. It
Yeah.
was not something I thought about. I feel like
Mhm.
I got lucky in a way.
Mhm.
Um, and I had access to pretty much everything you could. Like all my friends work at the forefront of health. I'm in like the innovation like city of the world,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
I'm surrounded by doctors. I'm working at a genetics lab in women's health, and still it was this hard for me. And I think
Right.
that really hit me hard. And also, when I went to go learn about more about my brain and my needs, I didn't find a lot. And it was very hard
Mhm.
for me to find the information that I was looking for. And I didn't have a good, like, nothing to stake myself on of where to start.
Mhm.
And like my therapist just gave me a diagnosis, but then I moved. And so I was not working with her anymore because she's not licensed in my new state. So I had to like find new healthcare providers. And
Right.
then I found one and, he's like, I'll give you medication, but that's where that ended. Um, and I
It's not
felt,
really it's
yeah.
I mean, well, I will tout the benefits of medication. I will,
Mhm.
I think it's it's helpful, but it's just such a Band-Aid. Like
Yeah.
it does help, but if you don't have the supports in other ways to understand, the changes that you go through, even going on medication, like, you know, no when I picked up my first prescription, they never told me, "Don't take it with orange juice."
Hmm.
Right? Because, like, it will counteract it.
Yeah.
Citric acid will counteract so, like, there's things that, like, you should be know that I shouldn't have had to learn on my own, right? And so, like,
Hmm.
somebody just tossing you a pill, it's like, "Well, thanks for the help, but
Yeah. And
there's
even
so much more
that
needed."
is, yeah, sorry, I did
Yeah.
not mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, you're totally good.
I was just thinking, like, even that is such a trial and error for most people too.
Oh, yeah. 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 Having to go through and try different medications. In one of the first interviews I did, Rachel, she said she tried her insurance required her to take so many different ones before she could get to what she ended up taking. She had to take all different kinds before she ended up on the medication that finally helped, but she had to try and try and try. And some of them had like horrible effects on her,
Hmm.
but she still had to go through taking them in order to get to, what worked. And so yeah, it's hard.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I had been through that already with migraine,
Mhm.
treatments and
Mm.
then other, like, chronic health stuff I'd had since I was a kid, and because I worked in the health space, I saw a lot of people navigating their health,
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
a lot of women with chronic health, I overlapped with them in my work, so when it was genetics, it was, like, um infertility and cancer and things like that, rare disease. And when I was
Mhm.
working in nutrition, a lot of it was women with chronic health challenges trying to solve it through like food sensitivities,
Right.
um, like boosting their nutrient intake and things like that, like increasing protein, going keto, all those like buzzwords
Right.
you hear. And when I was working in allergy prevention, a lot of it was around like controlling your environment to not be having like these big reactions to foods or to other things, environmental allergens, things like that.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so the theme that I picked up on, like, just from working in health in so many different angles, was that most of the advice is around, like, making your life smaller. So it's
Right.
like, eliminate
Mm.
this, stop doing that,
Mhm. Yep.
don't go here, don't do that activity, don't stay up late, and I just felt not just my world like caving in the more I tried to like micromanage my health, but I noticed this was happening to all the women and like the people around me who are also trying to micromanage their health. And what I learned in nutrition, working with kids and families in schools, was that it doesn't matter how much knowledge and education you have if the environment around you doesn't support
Mhm.
your well-being and healthy eating, you are not going to eat well. Like, it's just if you don't have
Yeah.
access to healthy food, you don't have time to cook it, or it's too expensive, or it doesn't align with your cultural, um, like, expectation of what your food should look like or what you're used to having,
Mhm.
good luck. Like, you're not gonna be able
Right.
to do it as much as you want to, and I've never met a parent who was like, "Nah, I don't really care if my kid eats healthy." Like, I think everybody's doing the best they can. It's just, like, a really difficult
Yeah.
challenge,
Yeah.
and so that's kind of where Divergently came out of. Like, I was healing, I had stripped everything down, I had, like, space to think about what I really cared about and like get almost like a high level perspective on everything I had learned and
Mhm.
what I felt was missing. And then being a mom too, I was like, well, what do I really value and what do I really
Right.
care about? And what kind of business? Like a startup is not the business to have if you're raising a kid and you actually want to see them. So that was part of it too, which is like, what kind of work can I do that's meaningful
Right.
and solves the problems that I care about and still allows me to be a parent and live my values and those
Right.
things? And so that's really where I landed with Divergently. And I basically just started building the thing I wish that I found when I went online looking for
Mhm.
resources and looking to understand my ADHD and
Mhm.
my sensory needs and all of that. And so I was like, well, what's missing from health? Community, social health is
Yep.
super critical, especially
Right. Yeah.
pandemic.
Yeah.
Um, I think that was the biggest piece that I noticed. And then environment, like, are the people around you supportive? And then I was thinking about that a lot. And I'm like, well, I don't like, I'm very vocal about having ADHD, but I don't think everybody can be. If
Mhm.
you need a certain level of safety in order to disclose, and,
Right.
um, in certain jobs, I would have never, ever disclosed. It would have been a huge risk to my career
Right.
and the way people perceived me, and
Mhm.
so that was
Yeah.
also part of why I wanted to create a space, which is, like, if you are newly diagnosed and you're still figuring out what that means for you, even if you're not newly diagnosed, like, if you're just thinking about it, who can you talk to? And not everybody can talk to their spouse or
Right.
their
Yeah.
parents even,
Absolutely.
or their
Yeah.
friends or their workplace. So it's like, come talk to other women who are going through it.
Right.
And then the other thing I was thinking is missing is information that you can trust, which is something that really bothered me about the health space is like, you can do paleo, keto, there's a million different diets, gluten-free,
Right.
vegan, and they're all right for they're all right, like for individuals, depending on what your individual needs are. But
Mhm.
at the base of all of it is like eat food that's food.
Right.
You know? And and I think we
Eat
can
eat
so
food you can identify. Generally, my thing is, like, eat food you can identify,
yeah, exactly,
like,
yeah.
look like, can you, pick out what this is? And if you are eating something that's in a box, that has a label, do you know what the things are that are in
Mhm.
the ingredients list? And that's always my, like, differentiation, like, if you can't pronounce it and you don't know where it came from, maybe it shouldn't be going in your body.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
at least not for all your meals. But,
Right.
yeah, I think that I I got frustrated with, like, the marketing of health
Yes, yeah.
and this kind of push to make us all believe we can control our
Mhm.
health outcomes and that we can just buy our way to better health or like buy healthier products or whatever. But a lot of times it's just really simple, like
Mhm.
lifestyle things. And if we're so caught up in, I saw these posts on before you before you eat your tomatoes, like cut them and leave them sitting out for 30 minutes because they'll have more nutrients. I was just like, if we're thinking about that kind of level of
Right.
optimizing our
Management.
health,
Yeah, yeah.
that becomes a stressor,
Right.
which is also not healthy.
Right. Exactly.
And then you're like, what information should I be focused on? And
Mhm.
if you're
Yeah.
like me and you have ADHD, you're taking it all in
Right.
and trying to apply all the rules perfectly, and it's just like not possible.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I very much have that same reaction where it's like, "Oh god, there's so much information I'm supposed to be tracking. There's so much I'm supposed to know about this, and I can't know everything about all the things, even though my ADHD really wants me to know all of the things about all of the things." It's just you gotta stop.
And if you know them all, you can't apply them all.
Exactly.
So then you
Yeah.
just feel like you're always behind, or that's how I'm like, I'm always messing it up. I'm always
Mhm.
behind. I didn't know what to
Yep.
value or prioritize. And
Right.
so,
There's always some sense of failure, right? Because, like, you can't do all of the things, you can't be all of the things, and so, I think that, at least for me, that's where a sense of the shame comes from because I have this idea that I can do all of the things, but, like, nobody can do all of the things. That's not how it works.
yeah.
So you're building a community and it's an online community, so we have the capacity for like lots of people. What is the online community like? What is the space like? How are you sort of building it to help support people in this space that you identified that there is so little sort of for social health?
Yeah, well, we're pre-launch, so we're launching January 1st. So
Okay.
I can tell you what I'm envisioning it as and how I'm building
Right.
it, but I think once we get people in there, it will evolve.
You'll know better. Yeah.
And it will evolve in whatever direction the members need it to.
Mhm.
So it's not really up to me. I think I'll just wait and see, what
Right.
people need and
Mhm.
what they're asking for. But right now, it's a community, so you'll be in an online space, like you said, with lots of people, and the idea is to facilitate conversation. So it could be like things about what we're talking about here, having space for people to process their emotional experience around a
Mhm.
diagnosis or around just like their daily kind of support needs. And then resources and tools. So it's like, okay, I'm really struggling with sleep. And then, like, what we'll do is help you find information about sleep that's been vetted. We have really great advisors on the board and medical experts who are coming in to like review content and make sure everything that we share or talk about is accurate and
Right.
true.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then also that everything we talk about has nuance. So it's like, my perspective is, again, going back to the thing where I felt frustrated with the way health was being marketed, is I don't want to be the kind of company or brand or place where it's just like, here's a prescriptive protocol, buy all these products and follow these steps.
Right. Here's a supplement that will help you and take this and, bugger
Mhm.
off. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly, because like
Mhm.
health is personal, and I don't
Mhm.
know what my members' individual needs are. It so
Sure.
depends on their family, their
Mhm.
environment, their like broader access to resources and support, and like only they know what they need. So
Mhm.
I feel like our goal with Divergently is to give you options
Right.
and explain what those options can do for you. So it's like, if you want to pursue the medication route, here's how you can do that. Here are some ways to go about that. Here are some risks and benefits of doing that. Now, like, you decide what you need, and we'll do what we can to help you facilitate it,
Mhm.
but we'll never
Mhm.
say you should go on
You do
medication.
this, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. I think that's really important that it's not a one it's not a there's no one solution, right? And everybody has to figure out what the solutions are that work best for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I think the benefit of community is that we can share stories and
Mhm.
strategies and try things on. Like,
Right.
you know, might have a strategy that you love. Like you just were telling me before we started recording that you wake up and you have protein
Mhm.
first thing in the day. Like that's
Mhm.
something that I should try. That would probably really help me too. And so in a community setting, we can learn from each other and try each
Yep.
other's strategies and then talk about it. Like, how
Yeah.
did this help? And I think that's really healthy and healing. And it also helps us feel seen. But
Yes.
we're not going to get all of the tools and support we need for our day to day lives from the medical system.
Right. Yes.
So we can't expect to like go to our doctor and like
Mm-mm.
have them help us like remember to wash our laundry.
Nope. Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, it's you barely get the support for what being medicated is like from your medical professionals or even from your pharmacists. Like, if you do pursue, medication, you have to do a lot. You have to learn a lot on your own. And I think any venue or any avenue, any path that allows you to kind of see that, you're not alone and that there are other ways you can do things and there are things you can do that can supplement whatever, systems you have in place, I think is really important.
Yeah, and then the access thing is the other piece that we're trying to build in. So it's like, if you need an evaluation right now, I get a lot of questions like, where do I go? How do I
Mhm.
get one? And then they're super
Yeah.
expensive. And how do I
Mhm.
navigate all the forms and all of that? And so,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah,
we're
there's a lot involved, yeah. Mhm.
yeah. So we're working on bringing in partners that are vetted and verified. So it's like, here are some places you can go, and just
That's
to make it
fantastic.
more accessible. And then
Mhm.
if there are products, making them more affordable by providing partner discounts. And then um, for things like if you want to like have a therapist, answer some questions, we have a therapist who's going to come in and do like a Q&A. And so just
Cool.
making things that normally are expensive, time consuming, difficult to access a little bit more accessible.
Yeah.
um yeah,
Awesome.
so those are my goals.
Yeah, I love it. I
Mhm.
think I really I can't remember exactly how I came across. No, I did. I came across you on Threads, and it was just one of those things that just kind of like popped up, and I'm like, "What is this?" And let me take a look, and then looked into the conversations that you're even having now on social media, which I think is really important, that we have places like that and that you can grow into it. I love the idea of taking something that kind of started grassroots, like in, social media and building it into a community that will really be support that a lot of us really need. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love social media and I love those connections, and then, like, finding people like you through social
Yeah.
media is
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And even it goes so much farther because I was listening to your podcast and then I discovered all these other people that you've
Yep.
interviewed, and so it's
Yep.
just a really
Mhm.
cool ecosystem, but then there's this downside of trolls and some of the nasty conversations that come up and
Mhm.
the misinformation. And so I think one of the nice things about community space is we can monitor that more closely and we have more control than we would on like a social
Yes.
media platform. And
Right.
so, if people are being nasty, like I'm not above kicking them out. I'll just be like,
Right.
you can't
Yeah.
be in this space. Like
Right. Right.
that's not what we do here.
Yeah.
And if there's medical misinformation flying around, we can address it and have a conversation around it or
Yep.
remove it because like that's not
Versus
good
yeah.
either.
Yeah, versus just open social media where anybody can have, anything and can post and, not sources aren't vetted and, you're relying on your communities or your connections being mindful about what they're sharing and as we have seen, most people are not. Most people don't take the step to make sure that the meme that they are posting is accurate, right? Or the link that they're sharing comes from someplace, vetted or uh, that has some sort of credibility.
Yeah, and it's hard to tell. Like, there have been
It is.
things where I looked and I couldn't figure it out. I was
Mhm.
just
Yeah, and I have been guilty of posting things and not looking and then having somebody call me on it and taking things down and going, "Okay, I'm sorry that I put this up. This isn't accurate," and things like that where, it's really hard in the way that uh, the information age, such as it is, evolved. We don't have clear markers of credibility, and we don't have internet literacy in a way that people can look at, sites and go, "Oh, well, who's sponsoring this? Like, who's paying for this?" And then people get swept up in an idea. And if you're preying on people's fears, or, people want easy solutions, and that's what you're presenting for the low, low price of my supplement for $49, whatever it is that they're selling in the end, people don't make those next steps in the critical process. And I really appreciate the idea that Divergently will help with that, because I think just being in a community where people are going to be more mindful of that. It's like when you raise the water, all the ships raise up, right? That sense. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, I really like that analogy. It is exactly what we are talking about earlier with the food. How can
Mhm.
you vet your information when the entire
Yep.
like your entire environment is flooded with bad information?
Right.
It's just
Yep.
really difficult.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
But we've been
Exactly.
pretty lucky on Threads actually. We
Threads
had
is a
only
really positive space. Like, I've had a couple of threads go kind of low level viral there about ADHD, and I've been really impressed with not as many trolls as I have had in my other life on some other social platforms that I will not name because I don't like the people who own them.
valid. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Social media landscape is pretty terrifying, but
Yeah,
not all
it's
bad.
it's not all bad. It's not all bad, and I think that that's important to note too, that we can build communities. So I'm excited to see where Divergently goes and to follow your path. And so as we wrap up here, I'm going to ask you my question, my big question. So, if you could tell your younger self one thing about discovering your spicy brain, other than this is what you have, what would you tell them?
Oh, this is such a good question. I think it would be something along the lines of like your internal experience was not wrong.
Mm,
Because I did spend a lot of my life second guessing
yeah.
what I noticed and perceived and then what I was told, and
Mm,
not like and really noticing that there is a difference between those two things.
right.
Now that I'm like nearly 40 and I've had lots of experience and I understand neurodivergence more and the connection between pattern recognition and high sensitivity and all those things, like, oh, I was not wrong all those
Right.
times.
Yeah.
I just was thinking in a longer term time horizon and with more information like perceived than the people
Right.
around me, or what I was noticing was threatening to the people around me, and that's why I was being shut down. So it's like either they didn't see what I could see or they were threatened by what I could see, but it
They didn't
wasn't
want to see
wrong.
what you were seeing. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
Mhm.
and I'm still navigating that, like, it comes up all the time, and I'm still navigating, when should I push it?
Yeah.
When should I just, like, know that I know and move on with
Right.
my life?
Mhm.
And also, like, understanding the felt sense of when I'm clear on something and I know, it's like a physical sensation, and so,
Right.
like, learning to trust that and give
Yes.
myself time to pause enough to feel it. I think I would have, yeah, told my younger self to allow that process to happen
Mhm.
and get really good at it, because now I'm aware of it and I have to almost unlearn all the bad habits
Yes.
I learned.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. I think, the process you're describing, I think, is, like self-gaslighting, right? Where we have been given so many signals that we shouldn't perceive what we perceive. And if we do perceive it, we shouldn't talk about it. And, all of that. And I think coming from, a neurospicy space where you see so much and you see so many patterns, and it can be threatening to people. It can be threatening to the status quo when you're like the person who's going to just point out and say the things. Like I have many memories of my childhood saying things I wasn't supposed to say and learning not to say them, not learning, that they were accurate, but learning that it was bad to say them and to voice them, and unlearning that it is the work.
Mm-hmm. I will do
hard.
it as long as I live, I'm sure.
Yeah, I just said this week to a friend of mine that I talked to my counselor about this yesterday too. I don't trust people who say they're healed, like past tense, because I don't really believe that our traumas stop affecting us and our difficulties and our patterns. If you're breaking out of patterns, I don't think you get to be healed past tense. I think it's a lifelong process of recognizing how it continues to impact you.
That's really wise.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It's taken some time to get here and to recognize that it is a path that I will, be continuing on, but I think it's valuable. So.
Definitely. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Let our listeners know where they can find you and they can find out information about Divergently.
Yeah, Divergently is at Join Divergently on social media platforms. We're most active on Threads, and then our website is joindivergently.com. Right now, if you go there, you'll be added to our free newsletter and waitlist for the community, and the website and community will be live by January 1st, probably earlier than that, but
great. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
A huge thank you to Kendra for joining me today. Please make sure to check out Divergently on Threads. It's such an exciting project, and I'm so glad to support it. Make sure to subscribe to Divergent Paths podcasts wherever you listen to podcasts, and like and leave a review, and share with your spicy-brained friends, and perhaps those who love them as well. Follow us on Instagram at Divergent Paths Consulting, no spaces. And until next time, stay spicy.